band caught the light first, glinting dull silver against skin that should not exist. Dr. Sarah Chun had been a marine biologist for 17 years, had cataloged species from the Mariana Trench to the Arctic Circle, and she knew with absolute certainty that the hand gripping the sampling net belonged to nothing in any scientific record. But it was the stamped numbers on that corroded steel bracelet that made her blood run cold. USN 0847C, United States Navy. Someone had caught one of these things before. The research vessel Coastal Pioneer departed Norfolk, Virginia on September 14, 2004, on what should have been a routine 2-week survey of deep-water squid populations in the Atlantic continental slope. She was a solid vessel, 95 feet of reinforced steel and diesel reliability, purpose-built for extended offshore research missions. Her captain, Michael Torres, had 30 years of experience navigating these waters, and his reputation for running a tight, professional ship had made him the first choice for academic institutions needing dependable transportation into deep water. The crew of 8 included Dr. Chun and 2 other marine biologists from Virginia Tech, a graduate student named Marcus Webb, who was working on his dissertation, 2 experienced deckhands, an engineer, and Torres himself. They were professionals, every one of them, with decades of combined sea time and scientific credentials that would fill a wall. The mission parameters were straightforward. Deploy sampling nets at various depths, between 100 and 500 fathoms, collect specimens, catalog, and preserve them. Take water samples, record temperature and salinity data. Standard oceanographic research, the kind conducted by dozens of vessels every day across the world's oceans. The Coastal Pioneer carried all the equipment expected of a modern research vessel: sonar, radar, GPS navigation, VHF radio, satellite phone, and a small laboratory space below decks where specimens could be processed and stored. The weather forecast showed favorable conditions, and as they steamed east toward their first sampling station 200 miles offshore, the crew settled into the comfortable rhythms of shipboard life. Dr. Chun remembered thinking, as she stood at the stern watching Virginia Beach disappear into the haze astern, that this would be one of the easier trips of her career. She had no way of knowing that, within 72 hours, 3 members of this crew would see their careers destroyed, that Torres would lose his captain's license, and that she herself would spend the next 20 years afraid to speak about what they pulled from the depths. The first 2 days passed without incident, steady progress through moderate seas under clear September skies. The Coastal Pioneer reached the designated research area on the morning of the 16th, and Torres positioned her precisely over the coordinates Dr. Chun had specified. The sampling nets went over the side, long conical meshes that would filter through thousands of cubic meters of water as they descended, collecting whatever lived at depth. It was methodical work, the kind that required patience and attention to detail, but offered few surprises. Marcus Webb operated the winch controls, lowering the nets with practiced care, while Dr. Chun and her colleagues monitored the depth readings and took notes. The ocean was calm, the sun warm on the deck, and conversation flowed easily among the crew. The first anomaly occurred during the evening of the second day, though at the time no one thought much of it. Dr. Chun was in the lab below deck, processing specimens from the afternoon sampling run, when she heard a sound that didn't belong. It came through the hall, a series of clicks and what might have been vocalizations. Not quite mechanical, but not quite biological either, too structured to be random noise from the ocean. She mentioned it to Torres at dinner, and he admitted he'd heard something similar earlier, had assumed it was dolphin activity, or perhaps the hull responding to temperature changes. The sonar operator, one of the deckhands named Jim Reeves, said he'd picked up contacts on the fish finder that appeared and disappeared without following any logical pattern, moving faster than any known marine species, diving deeper than whales typically went in these waters. But the ocean is full of unexplained noises, and experienced mariners learn to distinguish between ordinary strangeness and genuine cause for concern. This felt like the former, Curious, but not alarming. The kind of thing that gets noted in the log and forgotten. The equipment began acting strangely around midnight. The GPS signal flickered, showing their position, jumping erratically across the screen before stabilizing. The VHF radio produced bursts of static on unused channels. White noise that came in waves, almost rhythmic. Torres checked the electrical systems, found nothing obviously wrong, and attributed it to atmospheric conditions or solar activity interfering with their instruments. But Dr. Chun noticed that the interference seemed to intensify whenever they deployed the sampling nets, as if something below was responding to the disturbance in the water. She stood at the rail in the darkness, looking out at the black surface of the Atlantic, and had the uncomfortable sensation of being observed, of eyes watching from the depths. She told herself it was foolishness, the product of too many hours staring at preserved specimens under artificial light, but the feeling persisted. On the morning of the third day, Marcus Webb came up from the lab with a specimen that troubled him. It was a squid, nothing unusual about that, except that it showed signs of predation, unlike anything he'd seen before. The mantle had been torn open with remarkable precision, the internal organs removed cleanly, and the wounds showed what appeared to be tooth marks, but the spacing and shape didn't match any known predator in these waters. Sharks left ragged tears, orcas crushed their prey, but these marks suggested something with smaller, more numerous teeth, something that fed with methodical efficiency. Dr. Chun examined it under magnification and found what looked like a fragment of something lodged in the flesh, a translucent sliver that might have been cartilage or nail tissue, organic but unidentifiable. She preserved it separately, marking it for later analysis, a detail that would become critically important when the Navy confiscated their specimens. The sightings began in earnest just after dawn. Jim Reeves was the first to see it clearly, a shape in the water about 30 yards off the starboard side, moving parallel to the vessel. He called Torres to look, and together they watched what appeared to be a humanoid figure swimming just below the surface, keeping pace with the coastal Pioneer effortlessly despite their 5-knot speed. The shape was pale, almost luminous in the early light, and it moved with an undulating motion that suggested a powerful tail rather than legs. Torres trained binoculars on the water, but could see only movement, not clear detail, the shape diving deeper whenever he thought he had it focused. It stayed with them for perhaps 10 minutes before vanishing into the depths, leaving both men uncertain whether they had seen something extraordinary or merely a trick of light and waves. Dr. Chun saw them that afternoon, multiple contacts breaking the surface briefly before submerging again. She counted at least 4 distinct shapes, moving in coordination, circling the research vessel at varying distances. Their behavior suggested intelligence, purposeful observation, rather than random movement, and she felt the same uncomfortable sensation of being studied, assessed. One surfaced close enough that she saw the head clearly, saw the dark tangled hair and the large eyes before it dove again with barely a splash. She grabbed her camera, but the creature was gone before she could focus, leaving only disturbed water and the certainty that what she had witnessed was not any cataloged species. The crew gathered on deck that evening, speaking quietly about what they had seen, and Dr. Chun noted the change in atmosphere. The easy camaraderie of the first 2 days had been replaced by a tension that no one wanted to acknowledge directly, but that affected everyone's behavior. Men who had been joking and relaxed now moved carefully, speaking in lowered voices, glancing at the water more frequently than necessary. Torres doubled the watch rotation, keeping someone on deck at all times through the night, and no one questioned the decision. Something was out there, something that defied explanation, and the rational scientific training that most of the crew possessed seemed suddenly inadequate to the situation. Dr. Chun lay in her bunk that night, listening to the sounds of the ship, and beneath those familiar noises, she heard again the clicking, the vocalizations, closer now, more frequent. They were being surrounded, she realized, deliberately encircled by creatures that knew the coastal Pioneer was there and had decided to investigate. The question that kept her awake was simple and terrifying. What would happen when curiosity gave way to action? The nets came up heavy just after 1,400 hours on the third day. Marcus felt the increased resistance immediately, the winch motor straining more than it should, even with a good catch. He called up to the wheelhouse, and Torres came down to the deck to observe as they brought the net aboard. What emerged from the water was a tangled mass of squid, fish, and something else that none of them could immediately identify. Dr. Chun approached the net as it swung onto the deck, her eyes scanning for specimens of interest when she saw the hand. At first, her brain tried to make it human, tried to rationalize what she was seeing as some terrible accident, a body in the net, but the proportions were wrong. The fingers were too long, too thin, each one tipped with what looked like a translucent claw. Webbing stretched between the digits, delicate and membranous, and the skin itself had an unusual quality, a pale gray-white that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Dr. Chun heard someone behind her say something, but the words didn't register because she was staring at the rest of the creature tangled in the mesh. The torso was humanoid, but elongated, covered in what appeared to be scales that formed a natural pattern across the chest and abdomen, the same texture and color as the powerful tail that lay coiled in the netting below. The tail itself was at least 6 feet long, muscular, and tapering, ending in ragged horizontal flukes that reminded her of a cetacean's tail fin, but with a torn, ancient appearance. And the face. The face would haunt every member of the crew for the rest of their lives. It was humanoid enough to trigger recognition, similar enough to human features that the differences became horrifying rather than merely alien. The eyes were too large, completely black, without visible iris or pupil, lidless and reflecting nothing despite the bright sunlight. The mouth hung slightly open, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and dark hair, wet and tangled like seaweed, clung to the skull and shoulders. Dr. Chun realized with a start that she could see the creature's gills, slits along the neck and rib cage that fluttered weakly, working to extract oxygen from air they were not designed to breathe. The creature was alive barely, and Dr. Chun's scientific training kicked in immediately. She shouted for Marcus to get a tarp wet with seawater, for someone to set up the largest specimen tank they had on board, her mind racing through possibilities even as her hands trembled. This was impossible. This couldn't exist, but it was here, dying in front of her, and whatever it was, she had a responsibility to document it properly. Torres had frozen at the rail, his weathered face gone pale, but the 2 deckhands moved quickly, following Dr. Chun's instructions with the automatic efficiency of experienced crew. The graduate student, Marcus Webb, had his camera out and was photographing everything, his academic instincts overriding his shock. It was Dr. Chun's colleague, Dr. Robert Kim, who noticed the metal band. He had knelt beside the net, examining the creature's left wrist, and his voice when he spoke was barely above a whisper. "Sarah, look at this." The metal band was corroded, but still intact, clamped around the creature's slender wrist with a precision that spoke of deliberate placement. It was not decorative, not natural, but industrial in design, with a locking mechanism that would require tools to remove. And stamped into the metal, still clearly visible despite the corrosion, were letters and numbers. USN 0847C, United States Navy. A serial number. A tag. Someone had caught one of these before. Someone had tagged it like a research specimen, had marked it, and either released it or let it escape. Someone in the Navy had known these things existed. Dr. Chun felt the deck shift under her feet, though the sea remained calm. The implications cascaded through her mind, each one more disturbing than the last. If the Navy had caught these creatures, if they had been studying them, then why was it classified? Why wasn't this in any scientific literature? How long had they known? She looked up at Torres and saw that he understood too, saw the same questions in his eyes. "We need to document everything," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Photographs, measurements, tissue samples, if we can do it safely. Marcus, make sure you're getting clear shots of that tag. They worked quickly, knowing the creature was dying, but driven by the urgent need to record what they were seeing. Dr. Kim took measurements while Dr. Chun made careful notes, describing every detail she could observe. The scales were individual plates, overlapping like armor, with an iridescent quality that shifted between gray and silver depending on the angle of light. The webbing between the fingers was translucent, threaded with what looked like blood vessels or nerve tissue. The teeth were set in multiple rows, like a shark's, designed for gripping and tearing. The tail showed incredible muscular development, clearly capable of powerful propulsion through water. But it was the intelligence in those black eyes that truly unsettled her. The creature was watching them, tracking their movements with clear awareness, and there was something in that gaze that felt far too human for comfort. Torres had gone to the wheelhouse to radio in their discovery, but he returned within minutes, his expression grim. "Radio's not working," he said. "VHF's dead. Satellite phone won't connect. Getting interference across all frequencies." Dr. Chun looked up from her notes. "Equipment failure? Just checked it yesterday. Everything was fine. This is jamming, Sarah. Someone's blocking our transmission." The deck went quiet except for the creature's labored breathing and the soft sound of waves against the hull. Marcus Webb lowered his camera slowly. "They know," he said. "Someone knows we caught it." Dr. Chun wanted to dismiss this as paranoia, but she couldn't explain the radio failure any other way. The coastal Pioneer was 200 miles from shore, far from any coastal interference, and simultaneous failure of both VHF and satellite systems was statistically improbable. She looked down at the creature in the net, at the Navy tag on its wrist, and felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Someone was watching. Someone had been watching these waters, monitoring for any sign of these creatures, and they had just set off an alarm. They moved the creature into the largest specimen tank they had, a rectangular container normally used for keeping pelagic fish alive during transport. It was barely large enough, and they had to fill it with seawater pumped directly from the ocean. But once submerged, the creature's gills began working more efficiently. The black eyes opened fully, no longer clouded with suffocation, and it hung suspended in the water, its tail undulating slowly to maintain position. Dr. Chun had never seen anything exhibit such clear consciousness, such obvious awareness of its captivity. The creature's gaze followed her as she moved around the tank, and once, when she leaned close to observe the gill structure, it opened its mouth, revealing those rows of needle teeth in what might have been a threat display or simply a reflexive response. She found herself speaking to it, softly, telling it that they meant no harm, that they just wanted to understand, knowing full well that it could not comprehend her words, but feeling the need to communicate nonetheless. The creature's head tilted slightly, an eerily human gesture, and for a moment, Dr. Chun had the disturbing thought that perhaps it understood more than she assumed. The Navy vessel appeared on radar just after 1800 hours, less than 4 hours after they had pulled the creature from the depths. Torres saw it first, a fast-moving contact coming from the direction of Norfolk, traveling at a speed that indicated military propulsion. He called Dr. Chun to the wheelhouse, and together they watched the radar screen as the vessel closed the distance with unnatural precision, heading directly for their position without deviation. "They're not even pretending it's a coincidence," Torres said. "That's a straight line from Norfolk to our exact coordinates." Dr. Chun felt her stomach tighten. "How did they know where to find us?" Torres shook his head. "We filed a float plan before departure, standard procedure. Our general research area is on record. But to pinpoint us this precisely, this quickly? They've been tracking us specifically, Sarah. Since we left port, maybe before. The implications were staggering. If the Navy had been monitoring them from the beginning, if they had known the coastal Pioneer might encounter these creatures, then this was not an isolated incident. This was systematic surveillance of civilian vessels in waters where these things had been seen before. The Navy vessel was a small frigate, gray and angular, and moving with the kind of speed that came from priority orders. It pulled alongside the Coastal Pioneer just after sunset, and armed sailors crossed over before anyone on the research vessel could object. A lieutenant commander named Patterson took control, his manner polite but absolutely inflexible. He informed Captain Torres that the Coastal Pioneer was now operating under direct Navy authority, that all crew members were ordered to cease any research activities and assemble in the galley for debriefing. Dr. Chun tried to object, tried to assert her authority as the principal investigator on a civilian research mission. But Patterson simply looked at her with the kind of expression that comes from following orders one doesn't enjoy, but will execute regardless. Ma'am, you need to understand the situation. What you've recovered is classified material. This matter is now under military jurisdiction. Please cooperate, and this will go smoothly for everyone. They took the creature first, hauling the entire specimen tank across to the frigate with a precision that suggested they had done this before, had procedures in place for exactly this scenario. Dr. Chun watched it go, watched those black eyes staring back at her from the water, and felt a profound sense of loss mixed with something close to betrayal. She had pulled this thing from the ocean, had saved its life, and now it was disappearing into the same system that had tagged it in the first place. The debriefing lasted until well past midnight. Each crew member separated and questioned individually about what they had seen, what they had photographed, who they had told. Dr. Chun sat across from two Navy officers in the Coastal Pioneer's small galley and answered the same questions repeatedly while they took notes in careful silence. What time did you retrieve the net? Describe what you observed in detail. Did you take tissue samples? Who else has copies of the photographs? The questions were methodical and thorough, designed to map every piece of evidence, every witness, every potential leak. When Dr. Chun asked about the tag, about what the Navy knew about these creatures, the officers simply stated that she was not authorized for that information, and that any attempt to discuss her observations outside this debriefing would constitute a violation of the Espionage Act. She was given papers to sign non-disclosure agreements that made clear the consequences of speaking about what she had witnessed. When she hesitated, one of the officers reminded her gently that her research career depended on funding, grants, institutional support, and that none of those things would be available to someone who violated national security protocols. They confiscated everything. Every photograph, every specimen, every note Dr. Chun and her team had made. The Coastal Pioneer's logs were taken. The hard drive containing sonar and GPS data was removed. Even Marcus Webb's personal camera was confiscated, despite his protests. By 0300 hours, it was as if the encounter had never happened, at least not officially. The Navy frigate departed before dawn, taking the creature with it, and the Coastal Pioneer was left drifting in empty ocean, with a crew who had been explicitly ordered to forget what they had seen. Torres received new coordinates and instructions to proceed to a different research location and continue the original mission as planned. The message was clear. This was over. Life would continue normally, and nothing had happened. But of course, something had happened, and the aftermath would prove more devastating than any of them anticipated. Within 3 months, Dr. Chun found herself unable to secure research funding. Her grant applications rejected without explanation. Her proposals marked as not aligned with current research priorities. Dr. Kim left academia entirely, taking a position at a private consulting firm and refusing to discuss his reasons for abandoning oceanographic research. Marcus Webb's dissertation committee informed him that his research direction was no longer viable, and he was forced to start over with a new topic, losing 2 years of work. Captain Torres lost his captain's license. 6 months later, on a technicality involving documentation errors that he swore he had never made, and the Coastal Pioneer was sold to new owners who renamed her and repainted her hull. By the end of 2005, the 8 people who had been aboard the research vessel that September Day had been systematically separated, their careers damaged or destroyed, their credibility quietly undermined in ways that were never quite illegal, but were absolutely effective. A message had been reinforced. Silence was not optional, and those who saw what they were not supposed to see would pay the price for that knowledge. Dr. Sarah Chun kept silent for 20 years. She rebuilt her career slowly, carefully, staying away from controversial research, avoiding any topic that might attract unwanted attention. She never went back to sea, taking laboratory positions instead, as she never spoke about the coastal pioneer incident to anyone. Not colleagues, not family, not even to the other crew members when she encountered them occasionally at conferences or professional gatherings. They would nod to each other, acknowledgement without words, and move on. But she never forgot the creature in the net, never stopped wondering what the Navy knew, what they were hiding, and how many other encounters had been suppressed the same way. She kept one thing, the only piece of evidence she had managed to protect. A single photograph on a disposable camera she had in her pocket that day, a photograph she had not mentioned during the debriefing. It showed the creature's wrist, the metal band clear against gray-white skin, the numbers USN 0847C stamped into corroded steel. She kept that photograph in a safe deposit box for 2 decades, insurance against something she couldn't quite define, proof that she was not crazy, that it had really happened. In 2024, Dr. Chun is retired now, her career behind her, and the non-disclosure agreement she signed has no power over someone who no longer depends on institutional support or government grants. She decided to speak because she is tired of carrying the secret, tired of the fear, and because she believes people have a right to know what exists in the oceans. She showed me the photograph, and I saw what she saw. The creature's wrist, the Navy tag, the proof that our government has known about these things for far longer than anyone has been told. Dr. Chun's account is detailed and consistent, the testimony of a trained scientist who has nothing to gain and much to lose by coming forward. She does not claim to know what these creatures are, where they come from, or what the Navy's interest in them might be. She only knows what she saw, and she knows that the immediate response, the jamming of communications, the precision of the cover-up suggests systematic concealment of a phenomenon that has been observed multiple times. The waters off Virginia Beach hold secrets that the Navy does not want revealed, and the coastal pioneers' encounter was not unique. It was simply one moment when the curtain slipped, when ordinary people in the wrong place at the wrong time saw something they were never meant to see. Dr. Chun believes there are others, other researchers and fishermen and Navy personnel who have witnessed these creatures, who have been silenced the same way, who live with the same knowledge and the same fear. She wants them to know they are not alone. If you have experienced something similar, if you have seen things at sea that you are told to forget, share your story in the comments below. The truth cannot be suppressed forever, and every account adds weight to the evidence that something extraordinary exists in our oceans, something our government has chosen to hide. Subscribe to Maritime Incident Files for more accounts from those who have encountered the unknown in the deep waters of our world.